City Manager, will you take us into the budget item, please?
Sure, Chair. As I briefly mentioned in the beginning, and then as part of the memo, there was clear direction in the resolution that was passed last Thursday about how to think about not only this year's budget, but future budgets regarding not only the police department, but also other public safety and public safety functions that may be thought of in a different way, including investments in our mental health services, in our Office of Police Oversight, in our performance review metrics, and how we can hold ourselves accountable to those. And so we have then quickly worked with our budget staff, and part of those I highlighted in the memo, but I really look forward to the conversation here on really understanding that, as the budget is presented next month, what I'm seeing is areas in which we can think differently about functions that had been allocated within the police department in a new way. And so we had a robust discussion internally, and there was a long list. And some of those might be easier to reimagine than others. But I think that everything should be on the table and how we think differently about these functions. And I'm excited to have both partners within the city enterprise, with you and this both public safety committee, and importantly, many other stakeholders, not only community members, but our police association, our advocates, our legal counsel, and our legislators, because some of these will require legislative changes. And so as we put the advisory groups together and working with this committee, we look forward to seeing how we might reimagine this new public safety function in the future. So what that means for the budget itself is that there will be delineations of these functions that could be thought of differently, and those are the ones that will be kind of ripe for those immediate discussions to take place in a new and unique way. Those discussions may be able to be had before budget adoption, but they are not, unfortunately, because we're almost publishing the budget in real time, not in a way that I feel comfortable with before we get together and get the community buy-in and consensus around what those future functions might look like going forward. But here I really want to get the feedback on the initial reaction to how I'm structuring the budget, and then if there's additional direction that the council wants to give at this point in time.
Does Ed have something to say? Ed, are you still with us? All right, committee members, do you have any questions at this right now? No, Councilmember Poole? Or I'll get to
Great, yeah. Thanks, Chair, and to the city manager. It sounds like what you are saying is a lot of what we were talking about at our meeting on June 11, which is getting our policing back to its core mission, providing the services that are at its core mission, and then looking at additional responsibilities that have accreted to the police department over the years and analyzing them to see who, in fact, would be the more appropriate entity to handle those responsibilities. Is that accurate?
Thank you, Councilmember. Absolutely. And I really do believe that over the years, we have asked a lot of our officers, and now the question not only becomes, what do we want our police officers to be doing, but then how might these other functions effectively support the needs of our community in a different way than they have before? And so I think it's an exciting discussion. I think it's a needed discussion, but it really needs to turn into action because people need to feel safe in a way that they haven't been in the past. And so, but you characterize that exactly how I'm thinking, Councilmember.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Is this item 2 or item 3?
3.
This is 3. Okay. And I'm sorry if I missed this. The 100 positions that could you explain that a little bit more? And do you know what that dollar what that amounts to in dollars?
Yes, so I'm gonna start out, but then I'm gonna ask our budget director, our budget officer, Ed Vanino, to also include, but in items 96 from last Thursday, under the be it resolved, the first two bullets that were including no additional sworn police staff positions. And so when we put the 5-year staffing plan together that was voted by the council in December of 2018, it included 30 new officers per year for the next 5 years. And so we had included those positions in our planning, but we eliminated those positions for the purposes of this next year's budget. And then the second bullet was around eliminating the sworn positions that cannot be reasonably filled in this year. And we worked with the department to determine what that number realistically would be. And it was in the mid 60s. And so just for purposes, we did say about 100 of those, both with the vacancies and then the positions that were not, that would not be part of that 5-year staffing plan anymore would be that. I don't think we have an exact number for what that savings would be, but I think it's clear that any savings that would come from those would be for the purposes outlined in that resolution. And so we've started that work now, but look forward to continuing that discussion, because ultimately the council needs to approve how we think about those positions differently. Advani, did you want to say anything?
What I could add is that you know, a new police officer, salary, wages, benefits, retirement, medical costs comes out to about $100,000 per officer. So as the city manager mentioned, we're working with the department to assess the vacancies they currently have that can't reasonably be filled next year. We think that's going to be around 65. It depends upon attrition rates and things, so we're still trying to dial that number in. But you know, a reduction of mid 60s, you know, maybe $6.5 million is about what the cost of that would be. And then the 30 positions would be $3 million, but we don't typically budget brand new positions we're adding to the department for the full year, because we know they can't be filled initially. So, but certainly the ones that we had in the budget that won't be able to be filled, by removing those, it'll be in the range of $6 to $6.5 million.
Okay, and then this isn't so much a question, but it's a really important discussion that we're having here, and there seems to be this constant reference back to the Matrix report and to community policing. And I don't know if, you know, I defer to the chair on you know, but I feel at this point there may need to be some further council action, because I feel like we were stuck in this loop of, you know, we kept asking for more accountability and transparency, and the response we would get was, well, that's community policing. And then it moved from there to community policing means we need more police officers, because if we're using this certain ratio to determine time, commitments, and being able to respond and being able to community police, we were in this loop of okay, you want reform, you need community policing. You want community policing, you need more police officers. And I think we all can agree that we have moved. The moment is demanding us moving from that narrative. The narrative of that is the way to address this issue. And so I want us to move from referring to the Matrix report and saying the Matrix report told us this and this, because it's an entirely different conversation. And so, you know, I think that's work that needs to be done on this committee, or however we all believe it's best to address that. But we have moved from this idea that adding staff is going to fix anything, because it's not. And so just want to add those comments, and happy to hear people's thoughts on how we move from that.
Member Tim, I will acknowledge exactly what you're saying. This conversation today is not the conclusion of our budget conversation, as you know, but for the public who is watching intently, this is the beginning of that conversation. And, you know, I'm not going anywhere on vacation. I don't know how many of you are not going anywhere on vacation. I'm going to be around, and I think Mr. Van Enu and the city manager are going to be tired of hearing from me, and maybe from the rest of you too, about how we can continue to innovate. Also, the other item on this agenda, item 2, which speaks to your resolution, Mayor Pro Tem, about metrics, is going to be an important part of that. Councilmember Kassar, did you have?
I think that that I really appreciate this as a first step, and of course we'll work on the budget once you put it forward. But I appreciate the reduction, essentially just following what was unanimously approved, and we all recognize that many of us want to do even more, and it'll be our task to see how much more it is we can do. As far as what we move the funds over to, I know that there is a list in the resolution, but in my own reflection in the last week, I really do want to emphasize that we are trying to invest in more forms of community safety. So I've been working off sort of a list of 7 things, and probably want to continue to add more, but family violence shelter and prevention, given that that's the biggest chunk of our violent crime, that oftentimes doesn't just get fixed with more patrols. 2, mental health response, which I know we've all been talking about, and there's been a lot of leadership from the city in the last year on, but really ramping that up. 3, addiction treatment. You know, we so often respond to addiction with policing that doesn't address the addiction. Addressing homelessness with housing as number 4. Something that continues to be a real issue in my district, and I know in other parts, is support for sex workers. You know, so often, again, we try to address that with policing, but it doesn't actually help folks that oftentimes really need our support. Gun violence intervention and prevention. You know, I appreciate the leadership of council members here who set up that task force. We're really interested in their non-policing ideas for on this. And then I've been seeing in other parts of the country hospital intervention programs where we get to people at the hospital that when there's been violent crime and sort out issues, make sure that issues don't escalate further. Because sometimes when somebody winds up in the hospital for violence, it breeds more violence, and having intervention there. That's just a short list of 7 ideas. But I think half of our task is how to reallocate dollars from policing to these other solutions. And then the other half of the task is to actually invest in those solutions that will be more effective. And I think that that's really hard work we need to do, and I want to be talking about in this committee. So I wanted to be just floating that kind of list out there for folks. And one other thing would be, I know there's a lot of community members trying to look at our budget, and the traditional ways we have the budget binders sometimes makes it hard or somewhat opaque to get into some of the detail, but line item budgeting is also so complicated. So if we could have a level of the police budget that was at a midpoint level, I'd be interested if other council offices are interested in something like that. But that may make it easier for people that will be watching this closely to better understand what it is we're working on. So Manager, I appreciate what you've done. I think many of us want to go push to go further on some of those issues, but I appreciate what you've done so far.
Councilmember Kitchen.
Yes, I'd echo what all of my colleagues have said. City Manager, at the right time, I'd like to understand, and this is probably offline, but I'd like to understand the groups that you're creating. I forget how you characterize them in the memo, but what subject matter areas they're going to cover and what your timeline is for setting those up. I think that'd be helpful. I also think that it could be useful at some point to look at the matrix report. I agree with what Mayor Pro Tem is saying. I think that I think to some extent the recommendations in the matrix report got overshadowed by the conversation that she highlighted, and we don't want to be in that conversation anymore. There are some other types of recommendations in the matrix report that I don't believe we've really carried out, and I'd like for us to perhaps at some point revisit. And then finally, I would suggest at some point in the future, Councilmember Kassar, I appreciate the areas that you've laid out, and I would agree with those. I think there is a intersection here with public health, and I think that at the right time when we need to have those conversations, our public health department will need to be front and center as part of these conversations. And at some point, I think that the Health and Human Services Committee can help add to the conversation we're having here in the Public Safety Committee, and there might be occasion for some joint meetings there. So, and then finally, I would just say, City Manager, I don't want us to go backwards in terms, and I don't think you're suggesting that we go backwards in any way. I don't mean that, but we have at least one program which Councilmember Poole and I highlighted in our amendment, and that's the Mental Health Diversion Initiative. I don't think we need to wait to decide to bring that to full funding. And what we put in the resolution was that one be brought to full funding. So I appreciate that it will take some time with all of these areas to have conversations and flesh out the appropriate places. But I would like to suggest, and at least it was not the intent of the amendment, that particular program wait in terms of it being fully funded. So we can have more conversations about that, but I just wanted to say that.
Councilmember Renteria.
Yes, and I agree with my colleague Ann. You know, we need a lot of mental health diversion right now. I think that's the biggest problem that we're facing here in Austin. You know, a lot of these programs, and I've been reading about how they're doing it in Europe and other places in the world, and they got very good programs, you know, without having the police officers involved, and you know, especially when it comes to mental health and the patrol, the people that are members of this group that are hired out to go out to do that. And one of the things that keeps popping out at me is that they really do work, and they're very successful where people can implement that, but it's also very expensive, and it costs a lot to implement these kind of programs. So I am really want to look really down into and take advantage as much as we can, knowing that we're going into a fiscal year with a lot of unknown when it comes to, you know, what we're going to be able to generate in revenue. And we're losing a lot of our sales revenue out there that we're not going to have available. So, you know, City Manager, I think that your recommendation is right. We need to break up these departments so that we can, you know, take it out of the, you know, so we can have these programs to help our citizens and lead us the right way. And I know it's going to be expensive, but I hope that you can go out there and find the resources. And we should really just start looking at what kind of resources we're going to have so we can implement these kind of programs. Thank you.
Councilmember Alter.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the city manager to speak a little bit to how we might incorporate a sort of a combination of zero-based and outcomes-based budgeting, as was in 96, moving forward with the budget, whether it's in fiscal year 21, mid-year arrangement, or fiscal year 22, unless we kind of go down to the very bottom and really try to understand how every expenditure is meeting goals that we have and outcomes that we want. I'm not sure how we transform things. And I know that was short order from last week to, you know, essentially this weekend to incorporate that into your budget proposal. But I think we need a path that helps us to see how we're going to do that investigation and how we're going to unpack the budget. Because if I'm understanding correctly, you know, you've put forward about 100 or so position savings. There may be a few things that move around, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And obviously between Thursday and today, that is understandable, but it's not quite getting us where we need to do. So can you speak to how we would incorporate the zero-based and the outcomes-based approaches into the timeline and the trajectory? And also, if you could speak to how some of the work you initiated in the last budget about cost efficiencies, et cetera, might be deployed to help us in looking at the police department in particular.
Well, thank you for that opening, council member. I do think that's going to be an important part of the coming year. And as you pointed out, there just wasn't enough time to think more holistically about a zero-based approach for this next, or at least the proposal that I would be putting forward in July, as we do have to tighten those screws before essentially by tomorrow, this weekend, as we're in the final stages of this. But the groundwork has been laid. I really think that not only the conversations that we're having by delineating the different areas that we might be thinking differently about, as I will be doing in the proposed budget, and some of the additional direction that was given in that resolution of looking at all the grants that we receive. How do we make sure that these are appropriate resources that would be going to the departments? But there is a sequencing with that, because we need to define what public safety needs to be for our community and then build the budget based on what those expectations are for the community. But I do think over time, through this committee, through the Audit and Finance Committee, we will be able to have a more robust conversation on how to essentially, as you pointed out, have a zero-based budgeting exercise for not only the police department, but other departments throughout the city. I think we also have an opportunity to build off of the work that we did do on efficiency that is ongoing. Some of that's looking at our support services. So we also know that the police department has resources from HR to IT to finance that could be done in a more effective way across the enterprise. And that is the work essentially that part of our efficiency study is moving forward with. And so we look forward to more updates to not only this committee, but the Audit and Finance Committee and the entire council as we have more recommendations and implement those recommendations going forward. I'm going to turn it over to Ed to see if he has any additional comments just as the budget's structured, because there are some time constraints that we have throughout the year that are also important to note.
Yeah, I just would just add to what the city manager said, that I, for one, was actually very happy that was a fairly late but a good add to the resolution from last week, because absolutely, if we're going to reimagine public safety in Austin, of course, part of that has to be rethinking the budget for the Austin Police Department. We will be presenting that budget proposal to you on July 13th, which for all intents and purposes means in the next few days, we need to get the numbers buttoned down so we can prepare all the documentation. So we are not going to be able to implement a fully rethought, outcome-based, zero-based budget in time for fiscal year 21, but I am extremely excited about doing that as part of the fiscal year 22 budget. And as you mentioned, potentially we could come back with a mid-year change to the budget if the timelines that we're on allow for that to occur. But as the city manager said, we really do need to do the work first of figuring out what is going to be the reimagined approach to policing and providing public safety in the city. What are the roles and responsibilities of the different entities going to be? And importantly, what are the expectations for the outcomes we're trying to achieve? And then do the zero-based budgeting, because if we start from zero with our current goals and our current objectives and our current approach to policing, I can guarantee you we're going to pretty much just build it up from zero, and it's going to look very much like it does now. So we really have to first have that broader conversation about what the reimagined framework for public safety will look like. And another thing, it wasn't mentioned, but also an initiative we launched last year was related to SD23 and aligning all of our department work programs to SD23. That work is ongoing, but it's already starting to bear fruit in the sense that the catalog of work programs from our departments is helping us quickly hone in on those different programs within the Austin Police Department that perhaps could be better performed by other city departments, new city departments, or perhaps even other agencies. But that work that was led by the Office of Performance Management, starting with the adoption of the fiscal year 20 budget, is already starting to advance the work of item number 96 from last week's agenda.
Councilmember Braulter.
Thank you. Appreciate that. When you have a chance, Ed or the city manager, if you could please let me know when we're going to be hearing back some of those specific recommendations from the efficiency study and how they fit into the budget. And then I wanted to echo one of the elements that I think I heard Councilmember Kassar highlight, which was dealing with gun violence and steps that we can take that may or may not involve APD with respect to gun violence that our task force will be getting back to us with shortly, that those may have a really big impact on safety and that we should be looking into those. And then as we're thinking about ways to reimagine public safety and our contributions, I also want to put out there that there's some opportunities in the Parks and Recreation Department for youth training, youth leadership, counselor and training kinds of things, the aquatics program that they have for lifeguards, as well as some public safety lighting in our parks and funding for some of our rec centers like the Millennium Youth Center that all may contribute to a safer environment, particularly for our youth out there.
Thank you. So just as a time check, we can do a little bit more. I want to get us into executive session. I will say for my part, I am interested in an analysis of 911 calls and the nature of those calls, the time spent on those calls, and the ride along that I did. It was very eye-opening that there's work officers are doing that probably doesn't have to be an officer, or that the officer could be doing the first 30 minutes of, but not the 4-hour parts that I saw the officer I rode along with, and how we might be able to transfer some of their duties to other departments as we manage the work they have to do. Mayor Pro Tem, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I know that it's tough to hear. We can't do this budget, but we'll do this budget and then we'll tie that. And I totally understand, Ed, and I know this is hard work and we all wish we were in January or February right now, but I just can't. We keep talking about this moment and the need for change, and we know that once a budget is approved, it is incredibly hard to move stuff around. And so if I misunderstood, I apologize, but I feel like, and I'm even more incredibly grateful that we're having this discussion now, because the next time we meet will be when we're getting a presentation of what the budget is. So I guess my thoughts to the city manager is we have got to be presented with something that provides a significant move towards diverting funds from the way we used to do public safety and the way we used to respond in our police capacity. Because without that, I guess my hope is we all made some very clear statements about wanting change. And without that, I'm curious to know, if we don't do that work now, are we going to have 6 votes to pass the budget? And then what happens when we're on the last day of our budget readings, and because we haven't been able to do that work because we've told ourselves, well, that's too hard to do right now, we'll make sure we do it next time. I just want not to be in a position where we can't pass a budget. I know there are concessions made in budgets. None of us have ever been 100% happy with every budget. But we voted yes because, not all of us, but we voted yes because we understand, that at the end of the day, we still need to operate as a city and have that budget. But I can't see myself, unless there is a significant move from moving funds, I can't see myself voting yes on a budget. And I would hate for my last budget to be a no vote. So just wanted to provide that feedback.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I think that was pointed in my direction, and I wear it with honor. So I think it's time to go into executive session. Is there any objection? Councilmember Kassar?
No objection. It just sounds to me like there's some things that we've all asked for in short order. The 911 calls breakdown that you mentioned, I would really like just some heads nodding that some level of that would be helpful. And and some better way to look at that budget than just the big budget binder so that we can do the work that the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned. And then finally, the assumption that it's about 60 positions that could be filled next year would be really helpful to know which assumptions go into the back end of that, especially what we just heard about delaying the cadet class. So at a minimum, those three things in an email to us would be really, really helpful. There may have been other documents mentioned by members, but those three things would all be very helpful for me.
Councilmember Harper Madison.
Chair, could you give me some clarity? Are we coming back out here after exec session?
Yes, we will go into executive session and we'll come back out and take up the other two items, which will be a review of we'll review the protests and we will review the general orders and the item from the Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay, in which case, one of the things I'll keep to myself for now, but something I'd like to add to the list of points of consideration. This was a conversation that we had before. We took Dr. Escott and slung him right into Austin Public Health territory. But we were having some conversations last year about dispatch. That's one of the things, in addition to some of these other points of consideration, that's one of the things that I'd really like for us as a body to really start having some conversations about is the efficacy of dispatch. Like what tools are we deploying and under what circumstances, et cetera. I know that there's some nationwide push for folks to just really talk about how to really, as a nation, have sort of this unilateral retooling of dispatch systems. And I think that's one of the things that we really could dive into, making sure that we're deploying the appropriate tool for the appropriate call and under what circumstances. And so if we as a body could start having that conversation as well, I know there's several things we called for. That's one that I'd really like to take a deeper dive into.
Councilmember Ellis.
I'll be very brief, but what Councilmember Harper Madison said made me want to also ask about shift changes. There's been a couple of incidents in the past year where something happened during a shift change and there was a delay in response. And so I want to know kind of more about how to make sure we don't have gaps in service during shift changes.
That's a good conversation because it depends on what kind of response you're talking about. Councilmember Tovo, did you have your hand up?
I did have a quick question for the city manager. City manager, thank you for the memo of yesterday. I had a quick question for you regarding something you mentioned on page 2 of 3 about creating a civil rights division, the first of its kind in Austin. Is that anticipated to be within the police oversight, the Office of Police Oversight, or is this in some way linked to our new civil rights office?
It's the latter, council member. Thank you for bringing that up. It would be whether it's called an office division, but it would be independence of both HR and other departments, particularly not within OPO or within the police department. But we're working out some of those details. There will be a report that's forthcoming. It's kind of in the final draft stages that will be presented to council and the community. But after not only hearing from some of the community expectations, but talking to staff, I wanted to accelerate that work and make sure that we are not slowing down to establish that entity going forward. I think Deputy City Manager might be on the line, and if I missed anything, she might be able to chime in, but I hope that answers your question.
Just to clarify, so this is the Civil Rights Office that was contemplated and had come forward. And so I guess, and I don't think we have time today, but it would be interesting to know sort of how you are reconceptualizing it based on some of the current imperatives and resolutions. I was clear with kind of what its rules and responsibilities would be, as of a few months ago, but it's, I definitely would like an opportunity to talk more with staff about how that's sort of developing.
Great. And in the interest of time, we'll just follow up with a memo to all mayor and council about that status.
That sounds great. Thank you.
I did promote the Deputy City Manager into the meeting if she has anything to add to that while her tech catches up to the meeting. Councilmember Poole.
Great, thanks. Also, I'd like to have a conversation about how we see the Public Safety Commission interweaving with our new processes. In the past, they were part of the citizen review and oversight. And And that dropped out in our last iteration of the contract and some changes that we made. So I'd like to go back and review that and see if we can't weave those most excellent volunteers back into these processes more fully. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Poole, for mentioning that. We're already planning to engage with the chair of the Public Safety Commission. They have already reached out to all of us with those same thoughts and concerns, and so we're going to start engaging in that conversation. Wanted to get through today first. Nuria, did you want to add anything?
In the interest of time, I just wanted to confirm the expectation exactly as the city manager had said, although the group had always thought about broadening this work, and so we have thought about certainly what that looks like for employment discrimination and some of the workplace issues that are currently there, but there was also a nod in the future to expand to a variety of broader issues as well. So we will keep you informed and we can look back.